Hey everybody, got some updates on the 80 Buick Regal that I'm putting the 274 cubic inch stroker on, or the 4.5 liter. 4.5 liter compared to 3.8 liter is a big difference. 3.8 liter was a stock engine in this car. This is a 274 cubic inch stroker, which is made way bigger than a 231 cubic inch engine. So this is a 4.5 liter, 274 cubic inch engine, board stroked, all forged internals. It's a real strong engine, long rods, 6350 rods for more RPMs and more torque. Here's the T66 turbo. I just got the external wastegate put on so you can see where it dumps. See where the wastegate dumps right towards the downpipe, so it won't burn any electronics or anything like that. So external wastegate was installed today. I installed the electric coolant sensor for the temperature sensor, which shows the gauge in the car. I still have to fabricate, since this car originally had the alternator on this side where the turbo is, so there's no room for the alternator. At least I don't see room for it. I might have to do some finagling. But on the 87 Regal, the alternator's on this side, so I have to fabricate a bracket. I got the power steering pump installed, but I have to fabricate an alternator bracket. Now, yes. Now, I'm probably the first one that's done this. You're basically taking 1987 turbo manifold setup and installing it in 1980 draw-through turbo Buick, which is totally different. I mean, the 80 Buick has V-band belts, where the 87 has serpentine belts. So I'm kind of reinventing the wheel here. I've had to fabricate a lot so far to get things to fit. I have to trim the intake manifold here to get the distributor to plug in because it's really big and bulky. HEI distributors are really big and bulky, whereas the cam position sensor on the 87 Buick setup is really small and doesn't get in the way of installing distributors, turbos, and things like that. But it's a very tight fit between the distributor, the HEI distributor, and the turbo inlet. So far I haven't been able to get the turbo's compressor air filter on there because it's too tight with the distributor. So I'm gonna have to design a special intake for that. I have to fabricate a bracket for the alternator or modify something to make it go on the left-hand side, which I don't see happening, or the passenger side, because you got the coolant radiator hose, oil filter, and the turbos right there with the manifold. And you can only go to one of these belts, this front pulley here, right there, so it has to line up right here. And the alternator is a very tight fit right there. So what I'm looking into doing is fabricating a bracket to mount it on the passenger side. If that fails, then I'll have to find a workaround to mount it on the passenger side. So far it's been a real pain. I've got the mechanical fuel pump installed, so it'll be carburetor type pressure for the blow through carburetor. If I need more fuel pressure later, I can always install an electric helper pump for that. I still gotta find blank offs for the additional holes on the manifold, blank off bolts so I don't get vacuum leaks in these holes right here that are on the intake ports. As you can see, I've got to get the carburetor installed. This Offenhauser manifold has a Holley and Edelbrock type of flange. I may do a spacer and eliminate this part of the hood so it can breathe and have room so I can close the hood if I put a carb spacer on there. because the carburetor's got to go there, and a blow-through hat, which is another 3.5, 4 inches tall. So that's probably about 8 or 9 inches from there to here to get that blow-through turbo set up. I've got to hook up the thermostat from the other manifold. I'll show you the other intake manifold. The original intake manifold for this car is a draw-through turbocharged setup where you go through the carburetor, the fuel and air mixture goes in the turbo's compressor and pushes its way into here, and fuel and air mixture mixes in the manifold right here. Because fuel and air go here, get sucked in by the compressor and forced in to the manifold. So this is a draw-through setup from the factory, but I had fabricated an 87 turbo to fit on there instead of the 1980, which responds better. It's a Garrett. It's a AR60 Garrett, so it's a better turbo. I got to get the HEI to fit right with the cap and rotor, get everything to fit right. Got to modify the alternator to fit. A lot of little things left to do. There's the thermostat I have to get mounted on the new manifold, which goes right there on the old manifold. And I have to mount that on the new manifold with a 180-degree thermostat, so she'll stay decently cool. But yeah, a lot of little things to go. But I've got a lot of the major things done. I've got the wastegate and downpipe assembly done, which I'll show it to you. The downpipe is going to attach to the rest of the exhaust system down here. Look down here. There's the downpipe. And the downpipe will go from here to the rest of the exhaust system, which is a custom side pipe. So it's going to join from the downpipe, which is 3-inch, to a 2.5-inch side pipe exhaust, which was custom before. And I'm not going to put a muffler there. It's going to be literally a turbo exhaust. So from here to here will be pipe. And as you can see, it's straight all the way to the side. So it's going to be literally a turbo exhaust with no mufflers whatsoever and no restrictions except the turbo. The turbo will be the only restriction. It's not too much of a restriction, but it still is a restriction. Just like passing through the headers and the exhaust is a slight restriction, but it's nothing compared to mufflers and catalytic converters. Since this is a classic 40-year-old car, 43-year-old car, doesn't need a cat, at least here. In California, everything needs a cat, so this is going to be a track car, so it's not going to be really a street car anymore when I get done with it. It's got a 3500 stall torque converter with a turbo hydromatic 350, which is bolted to this engine. So a lot of little things left to do, but as you can see, it's coming along. I had to fabricate an oil return line, as you can see. I'll show it to you, because you have to have an oil inlet line, an oil return, which had to go right to the block on this engine. So oil return. Let's see if I can show you the oil return under the turbo. There you go. There's the oil return line, and it goes to a tube, which is the original oil return line that used to go to the manifold, but now it goes under the intake manifold into the block. So oil return line goes right close to where the lifters are, cam and lifters. So a lot of little things have been done to this car. A lot more to go. Figure I'd give you a nice update. Of course, we got an electric fan here. And eventually, when I get the carburetor and carb hat and everything, I'm going to install the Extreme GN1 front mount intercooler in here. And this will be a blow-through turbo car. Just like the 87 car, except I'm going to be carbureted instead of fuel injected like the 87. Look at all these parts I still got to do on the 87. This is the original engine from the 80 Buick. Very low compression, 3.8. Really small as far as, you know, back in 1980, they used low compression engines with turbo boost, whereas the newer cars, they have high compression with the boost, so you have faster turbo response and less turbo lag. 1980, the engine only had like 8-to-1 compression ratio, which is really low. And of course, you had a lot of turbo lag because of that. Plus, the compressor was mismatched on this engine from the factory. You had a huge exhaust housing, a tiny turbine, so it takes a lot of RPMs to spool, and it had a small compressor and a small compressor housing, so it moved very little air. So let you see this original engine. This is the original 3.8 of the 1980 Buick Regal Sport Coupe, which was a draw-through turbo. I'm going to rebuild this engine, so it'll be my spare. I'm going to make this a stroker engine, just like the other one, with the 6350 connecting rods. Here we go. 6350 connecting rods. 3.625 stroker crankshaft, which is in a box over here. We'll take a walk into the garage. This is the Eagle stroker crank for the 3.8 liter V6 to make it a 266 cubic inch, or maybe like a 4.2 liter engine. So it's a forged billet crank, really strong. Got all kinds of parts around here. Big front mount intercooler for twin turbos. All kinds of parts that are going to go on my project cars eventually. This Eagle crank is for a 383 stroker under this cover. Still got the 455 Buick that I want to rebuild sometime soon. So I have a spare engine for the white Buick. There's the 3.8 V6, 5 liter V8. L24, big old 302, which has been max bored with 2 turbos, and of course the 87 Buick Regal Turbo T Limited, which has now the original rebuild engine in it with a T76 and external wastegate. See how you can see the accessories on this engine? They're serpentine belt. And the alternator goes on this side, say, by way of this bracket. So I'm gonna have to do some fabricating to get the 1980 Buick Regal here to have the alternator mounted on the driver's side, because it was originally on the passenger side, since the turbo was further back in the firewall. The original turbo was back here. But now the turbo's up here, so the alternator's not most likely going to fit there. So I'm going to have to fabricate it just like the 87, have it in this general area. So that's going to probably be the hardest part of this whole deal. So I hope you guys enjoyed the updates to this video, and you guys have a great day, and boost them all.